This summer, when Lupita Nyong'o appeared in the hit film of Homer's Odyssey, American politicians and business leaders with no actual knowledge of classical Greek culture complained that the film would cast an African woman in a story involving a sea on the African coast. What they were really debating was what people and cultures have value and deserve to be made visible in our media. They were debating the issue of representation. I'm Nathan Matthias, a communication and information science professor at Cornell University, who leads the Citizens and Technology Lab, where we work alongside communities to study our digital environments. From the very beginning, Cat Lab's research has examined questions of representation, studying how cultures and values are included in science by creating pathways for people to bring diverse perspectives into science. And today, we're going to talk about how to study representation on Wikipedia through a series of exercises focused on analyzing gender representation. Before we discuss how to analyze data, I'm going to summarize some basic ways to think about representation and fairness in the media. The Wikimedia movement has a shared vision of the world where every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. This is a beautiful idea and it will take generations to accomplish. But unfortunately, not everyone agrees with this vision, and many people have strong opinions about what people, cultures, ideas, and identities are shared with the next generation. I, for example, am a Guatemalan American of non-Indigenous background, and this is an image of what's called the Madrid Codex, one of 4 remaining paper books written by Mayan peoples of Central America, in what we call Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. The glyphs represent concepts, numbers, and sounds, and for 400 years, Mayan communities lost the ability to read and write our own language because a priest burned all but 4 of our books in the 1500s. To this day, Indigenous people are seen as lesser in some parts of Guatemala, and it was only in the last decade that an Indigenous woman appeared on the cover of Guatemalan fashion magazines, Maria Mercedes Coroy, who was the actress who played Namor's mother in the film Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Mercedes Coroy does have a Wikipedia page, one of 1,524 Guatemalans who have biographies, and one of the 24% of biographies about Guatemalan women on Wikipedia. Looking at this chart, you can see that most of the biographies associated with a given country on Wikipedia are about men, roughly 69 to 82% of biographies. These disparities are at different scales because Wikipedia also represents some places more than others. Notice that Burkina Faso has 1/5% of the number of biographies as people from the US, and Nigeria has 2% of the number of biographies. So people talk about geographical and cultural representation alongside gender representation. These kinds of debates ultimately wrestle with questions about the purpose of media and information in society. Are they a mirror to reveal ourselves and each other? Are they a lens on people with power? Or do they help us imagine who we might become in the future? Here are a few viewpoints I found helpful when thinking about representation. When I was an undergraduate, I studied post-colonial literature, and I read the ideas and stories of many people who worked to broaden whose voices get heard in society. I often think of my PhD advisor's friend, Binyamanga Wainaina, who critiqued how Westerners write, read, and fund African literature, and the work he did to create communities and publications like Kwani to change that. My teacher at the time, Priya Gopal, has written about how even this story of colonial subjects trapped by British media is not entirely accurate either, and how resistance to colonization actually forced the British to develop ideas about freedom in the 18th and 19th century that we tend to think of as fundamentally Western concepts. So rather than seeing post-colonial cultures as under-resourced or under some kind of deficit, we can think of our cultures as maybe erased, under-acknowledged, and bearing wealth that others can benefit from. The philosopher Miranda Fricker calls these questions ones about epistemic justice. We might ask ourselves how a group is depicted in the media. We might debate bias, whether the media favors one group or another. And we can look at the deeper question of whether people are represented and understood as they should be or they want to be. And that's what's interesting about the Wikimedia movement's mission statement, because it contains all of those debates in a simple phrase: a vision of a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. That covers people who are described, it covers people who are contributors, and also people who are readers. Now, in addition to gender, researchers have studied many other dimensions. For example, researchers at Oxford have studied the question of geographic and language equity on Wikipedia. In this article, Mark Dittus and Mark Graham ask, are the most detailed representations of this country written in a local language understood by the population or a foreign one. That's a great example of a metric that incorporates an understanding of nuanced questions about readership and place and culture. Now, what are the consequences for a community of being underrepresented in Wikipedia? In the case of gender bias, readers hear less about women, large language models and other AI systems learn gender bias, and women's potential, opportunities, and futures are diminished. When opportunities are withheld from women as a result, there's less to say about them on Wikipedia, which continues the cycle. When trying to study representation, researchers have uncovered many layers that contribute to the gender disparities on Wikipedia, both social and technical. By showing how these layers affect gender, I hope to help you think critically about your research. I think about these layers like the way I think about the layers of a slide projector. This is an illustration of the very first attempt at a color photograph developed by the scientist James Clerk Maxwell and demonstrated at the Royal Society in the 19th century. When Maxwell learned that the human eye has receptors for blue, green, and red light, he realized he could make color photographs by taking pictures of each color and layering them on top of each other in front of a light. Media is a bit like that. There's the ground truth of actual people in their lives, and then there are layers that form the picture that we have of them through media. As it happened, Maxwell got it wrong. He didn't know it, but his photographs were flawed. When scientists tried to reproduce the chemistry of his technique 100 years later, they learned it didn't actually work and ended up with a distorted image. And that's our job today, to understand how problems in any of these layers can create a distorted understanding of the world and account for the distortions in our own research too. Now, people often start thinking about a problem of representation when they learn about a clear and obvious problem at the surface layer. Women are underrepresented on Wikipedia almost every way you measure it, across many languages, the percentage of articles, the percent deleted, the length, the language used, classification schemes, and even the structure of links on the site. Now, when people learn about this, they often ask, how do differences in the opportunities for women shape this problem? Is that just how the world is? Out of 145 countries, 27.2% of women are elected to national office where elections are held. At a local level, women constitute 36% of elected members. Only 2 countries do have a rate that is 50% or more, and an additional 26 countries have more than 40% women in local government. So just even in politics, Wikipedia is behind the state of the world. Now, in between the ground truth and the contents of Wikipedia, one of the layers is epistemology. As a Guatemalan American, I love eating tamales, which are steamed for many hours with maize, pork, prunes, olives, peppers, and special spices. Now, when I asked my friend, a chef, if he could teach me how to make them, he asked his abuela, his grandmother. Her response, they are not for business. Because he's a chef with a restaurant, his family won't teach him or allow him to share the family recipe to protect their culture. Wikipedia sometimes faces a version of this, where communities don't want to make their culture available freely for just anyone to read and take. Or they convey their history in a format that Wikipedia is not designed to cite. This is one of the big reasons that Wikipedia has struggled to include indigenous knowledge effectively. Another layer is the information supply. Wikipedia relies on citations. If you make a claim, you need to back it up with a secondary source like a newspaper or academic article. In 1995, 16% of newspaper articles mentioned women. That rate increased to 26% by 2015, but it hasn't increased much further since then. And if you recall, that's roughly the percentage of biographies that mention women on Wikipedia. Information supply is a very important part of the story. Even when information is available, though, it might not be accessible for legal or technical reasons. For example, many publishers have been adding paywalls to their news sites to prevent AI companies from scraping their data. One consequence of this is that if Wikipedians cannot read an article, they can't cite the article or include its contents in Wikipedia. This technical issue includes access to internet. A study by Disses and Graham found that over the 2010s, as access to broadband internet grew, local language information about a given region increased along with it. Another factor that drives local language production is the existence of a diaspora with high levels of internet access. And even if you have information access and connectivity, you still need volunteers to make those contributions to Wikipedia and help people feel like those contributions matter. So far, this kind of analysis has been challenging since we have very few reliable long-term measurements of volunteering. But as groups like the UN make progress on measurement, I expect to see a correlation between the disposable time that women have available in their lives and the number of hours that women contribute to Wikipedia, and consequently, the rate of content about women on the site. Finally, once people contribute to Wikipedia, the site's own norms and processes play an important role in determining how women are represented. My colleague Francesca Tripodi has found that on the English language Wikipedia, biographies about women are more frequently nominated for deletion than articles about men, due to details in the English language edition's policies that sustain gender disparities on the site. So as you study what makes it onto Wikipedia, think about how these layers combine to produce the picture you see, from ground truth and epistemology and information supply, all the way to volunteer capacity and policies and norms. So how is the Wikimedia movement working to change this? Wikipedians work to create technologies, policies, and community organizing programs to transform how they interact with oral traditions. For example, a 2024 project organized a team that held workshops, trainings, recorded oral tradition, and improved or created over 3,000 articles relevant to Hausa culture and history on Wikipedia. The Wikimedia movement is also working to improve the information supply through projects like Wiki Imagine Lagos, where Wikimedian in residence worked with the Lagos state government to in a contest to highlight Lagos cultural landmarks, tourist sites, and festivals in the media in ways that could then be added to Wikipedia. Wikipedians have also made progress on the legal barriers that make it hard to access certain information. Projects like the Wikipedia Library grant access to newspapers, scholarly journals, and other paywalled information to people who contribute at least 10 edits a month. The movement is also working on the connectivity issue through projects like WikiFunding, which works to bridge the connectivity Grand Canyon and provide a way for those who cannot access the internet, either permanently or temporarily, to learn key digital and content creation skills while creating articles about their context, surrounding, and interests. Once the content is created, it can either be accessed locally or transferred and added to Wikimedia projects and other MediaWiki-based sites. The Wikimedia research team at the Foundation also does work on a regular basis every few years to survey and understand the work and role of volunteers, their experiences, and what they need to flourish and succeed. The movement also organizes editathons like Wiki Project Afro Creatives, which runs a regular editathon campaign to generate contributions on African film and television in English, French, Arabic, and African language Wikipedias, both online and through in-person events. And it's a widespread initiative. Last year's event had meetings in Nigeria, Togo, Rwanda, Kenya, Namibia, Botswana, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Guinea, Tanzania, Madagascar, Cameroon, and Egypt. This year, the focus is fashion, literature, and photography. Wikipedians are also working on changing their policies. Though changing a culture can take time, care, and a lot of energy, projects like the Oral Tradition Task Force have organized people from around the world to improve how Wikipedia's technology and policies include oral traditions. So as you set out to study and improve representation on Wikipedia, I hope these concepts of layers help you focus and calibrate the research that you do. As you look at these surface issues in the text, be asking yourself, what are the contributors to that? How can we study them? And how can we, as in the case with many of the field experiments that my lab does, how can we learn about these issues by doing causal research to test efforts at change? I'm excited to see the research you do and learn from it as a result of this summer school